project managing the installation of a hydrogen electrolyzer project. And today I want to give you an overview of the ways in which hydrogen could play a major role in our carbon neutral and green future. And so first off, what is hydrogen and what does it have to do with climate change? Hydrogen is very abundant in the environment, but it's always bound together with other elements like carbon or oxygen. And the most common combination is with oxygen in water, H2O. And these two atoms love to cling to each other very tightly. Now, electrolysis, the splitting up of two atoms that yearn to be together. Electricity can be used to drive the hydrogen and the oxygen apart, but they would very much prefer to be reunited. So electrolysis separates hydrogen from oxygen, and now the pure hydrogen can be stored in pressurized form in tanks. So when we refer to hydrogen power, we're actually just referring to the energy stored by having split hydrogen from its larger water molecule in the first place. We're not like creating energy or releasing it somehow. We are simply converting the electricity into stored energy in the form of separated hydrogen. And the device used to perform electrolysis is called an electrolyzer. And an electrolyzer takes the inputs of electricity and water, and pure hydrogen and oxygen come out of it. So now we have our tanks of hydrogen. What can we do with them? One use is similar to that of a battery in an electric car. In an electric car, the battery provides electricity to the motor. But in a hydrogen car, the hydrogen tanks, together with fuel cells, deliver electricity to the motors. So what is a fuel cell and why do they go hand in hand with hydrogen? Okay, a fuel cell is a device that recombines hydrogen, which was previously created and stored using our electrolyzer, with oxygen from the air to recapture the energy that was previously input in the splitting process. So the electricity that is released by the fuel cell can then be used to power a car or any other device. The only byproduct of the recombination is water. So rather than a tailpipe, hydrogen cars have a port that allows water to drip out the bottom of the vehicle. So an electrolyzer uses electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, while a fuel cell recombines both gases to produce electricity. So to put this loosely in fossil fuel terms, the electrolyzer is like an oil refinery, and the fuel cell is the combustion engine. The electrolyzer produces the fuel, and the fuel cell utilizes that fuel to drive an electric car or an electric load of some kind. So that's kind of the life cycle of hydrogen from production to consumption. And I'd like to now touch on the different types of hydrogen that are out there, because they are not all created equal, and not all hydrogens are environmentally friendly. So in an ideal world, the only type of hydrogen we would be producing would be green hydrogen. And that green hydrogen is produced when renewable or green electricity is used to power an electrolyzer. For example, during sunny summer months, a solar farm can create a lot of power, but that type of power can't be stored long term. However, if we use an electrolyzer during these peak green power production periods to create hydrogen, then we've suddenly created a type of energy that can be stored indefinitely. Unfortunately, electrolysis using electricity isn't the only method of hydrogen production currently being utilized. The other two types are gray and blue. Now, gray hydrogen accounts for the vast majority of hydrogen produced today, and it's made through a carbon-intensive process called steam methane reforming. And in this process, natural gas, which is composed of 4 carbon atoms and 1 hydrogen atom, is heated with high temperature steam to split the hydrogen from the carbon. The problem with this method, and the reason it's called gray, is that once the hydrogen is split from the carbon immediately bonds to available oxygen and becomes carbon dioxide. So this method of hydrogen production really offers no greening potential or green benefit, and it has a large carbon footprint. And then, so we've talked about green and gray, and finally we have blue hydrogen. And blue hydrogen is really just gray hydrogen with a carbon capture system added to the steam methane reforming process. Once captured, the carbon still needs to be stored permanently in caverns or in carbon-based products in perpetuity. So blue hydrogen is technically less bad than gray hydrogen, but it's still not nearly as clean as green. So we have gray, blue, and green hydrogen. Gray is the cheap polluting version. Blue is a half measure towards the solution, and green is the gold standard in terms of eliminating carbon emissions. So when we talk about hydrogen playing a central role in decarbonizing our energy mix, what we really need is green hydrogen. So you're probably wondering why this isn't being done more already, or why this hasn't been pursued in the past. And until recently, gray hydrogen has dominated the industry because it costs only $2 to $3 per kilogram to produce, per kilogram of hydrogen, compared to $11 to $13 per kilogram for green hydrogen. But the main thing that's different, and the main reason that the current sort of hype around hydrogen right now that is different from the previous hype cycles, is that the cost of renewable electricity has started to change and dramatically decrease. And the reason that this makes such a difference is because the cost of making hydrogen is 75%, or green hydrogen is 75% the cost of the electricity to run the electrolyzer, while the remaining 25% is the cost of the electrolyzer equipment itself. So as renewable power becomes cheaper to produce and electrolyzer costs go down with larger scale production, as well as potentially having more intense carbon pricing schemes, green hydrogen for the first time is now having the potential to be as competitive as gray hydrogen. So what are the advantages of hydrogen as a renewable energy source? Well, the single greatest advantage is its flexibility. As I touched on before, hydrogen provides a way to convert green grid electricity into mobile electricity. But unlike electricity, hydrogen can also be burned in heating applications or used directly as an ingredient in fertilizer or other chemicals. So at present, electricity produced by wind and solar can only be used in regular electrical devices and machinery. If converted to hydrogen, green electricity can be used to displace fossil fuels in heating applications or to replace the gray hydrogen used in the fertilizer and chemical industries. As such, conversion to hydrogen can decarbonize processes that don't even use electricity currently and currently have limited pathways to decarbonization. Another advantage of hydrogen is its long storage life. Hydrogen can be stored in tanks or in underground caverns and pipelines on a seasonal basis. So that enables you to make gas when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, and use the gas when it is cold and dark. And not only can you use it much later, like on a long time scale, you can also store much more of it much more cheaply than you can through battery storage, which involves a lot of investment in battery. It's also not limited by location. The best locations to make green hydrogen are those areas where renewable energy is most cheap and abundant, but there are few areas in the world where there's no renewable resources at all. So hydrogen production would be an accessible option to many countries, regardless of geography. You don't need to strike it rich and hit the big oil patch. Most places in the world have some combination of renewable resources available to them. And finally, hydrogen is safe. It's safer than many fossil fuels, and it doesn't contaminate. So hydrogen is stored either as a gas or a liquid, and if it escapes from its container, it just floats up into the sky. Whereas other gaseous fuels like propane are heavier than air, and they hang around on the ground level waiting for a spark or an ignition source. And then also in terms of transportation and handling, if hydrogen leaks out of its container, it just, again, floats up. You don't have to worry about contamination of water or property and equipment. So how can we move towards a green hydrogen future? Canada recently released a hydrogen strategy, which is a good sign and an important step, but it lacks specific targets. And these targets might say like something along the lines of 20% of the zero emission buses that are already mandated in the climate change action plan, or the Canada Climate Action Plan, would be powered by hydrogen. That's just an example of a target, but without concrete targets, reaching these goals become kind of a hypothetical exercise instead of reality. So we're really pleased that Canada has a hydrogen strategy, and we think it shows that there's, momentum and an understanding that if you want to get to net zero, you have to have some sort of hydrogen approach, but there's more work that needs to be done. So other things that governments can do beyond having, or as part of their strategies, is to support marquee demonstration projects in industries that are naturally suited to making the switch from gray to green hydrogen. And some of these marquee demonstration projects would build awareness of and familiarity of hydrogen facilities and offer training opportunities for new workers in the industry. So that's another one of the stumbling blocks for rapid uptake of hydrogen technologies, is that there isn't a whole sort of base of tradespeople who are already trained in it. But a great example of a big demonstration project is already happening in our own county. And I want to talk a little bit now about Bruce Innovates. And Bruce Innovates is actually, coverage of this initiative was how I ended up hearing about Carlsun Energy in the first place and becoming involved myself. So Bruce Innovates is an initiative of a number of sort of big organizations. Bruce Power, in partnership with Bruce County, Saugeen First Nation, and Carlsun Energy, have formed the Bruce Innovates initiative. And the initiative has several goals. First, they want to position Bruce County as a hydrogen center in Canada, and they want to highlight our natural advantages, which are an abundance of wind power and excess nuclear power, with both of which can be used to make hydrogen. We also have the presence of natural caverns, which are ideal for hydrogen storage. And these caverns are basically old natural gas wells, which are now unused. And we're also home to a large nuclear plant, which itself is a large consumer of hydrogen and houses a wide range of engineering expertise for handling gases. Second goal of Bruce Innovates is to develop hydrogen systems for remote communities, with Bruce County as a center of technical training and support. And then finally, the initiative hopes to build foundational projects that offer demonstration and training opportunities. So an initial tangible result, which is in the middle of the feasibility study process at the moment, would be an electrolyzer plant using electricity from our local wind resources, producing hydrogen for use at Bruce Power, where hydrogen technicians could be trained and innovations could be tested. And the hope is to create an education center close to or as part of the site of the Bruce Nuclear Visitor Center. And it really does, this sort of first marquee project really does showcase a lot of the advantages of our area, and could really sort of help position Bruce County as a jurisdiction that's serious about developing the hydrogen industry. So yeah, in short, our area is quite well positioned to become a major player in Canada's hydrogen future, and Bruce County should be commended for their forward thinking on this project. And so right now, my employer, Carlsun Energy, is involved in a project at Canadian Tire's largest distribution center in Bolton, Ontario, which is where I'm coming to you from tonight. It's Canadian Tire has been using fuel cell powered forklifts in their distribution warehouses since 2016, and hydrogen offers a fast recharge and a greater uptime and no carbon footprint. And the no carbon footprint is something that Canadian Tire committed to in their sustainability charter, and greening their forklift fleet is one of the ways that they are trying to make good on their commitments in that charter. So the current project that I'm on involves the installation of a 2 megawatt electrolyzer from Next Hydrogen, which is one of a handful of Canadian electrolyzer companies. And the 2 megawatts size is considered utility scale. That is large enough to create bulk amounts of hydrogen for an industrial user as opposed to small amounts for niche applications, which is what electrolyzers have traditionally been used for up to this point. This electrolyzer was assembled at Carlsun's facility in Port Elgin, and its installation is being handled and supervised by Carlsun. So this project is a great example of how corporations and industry are looking for large-scale green alternatives, and how a hydrogen future is possible with enough research infrastructure and research investment in place. So I know I've thrown a lot at you, and I find that this topic is kind of like something where you end up drinking the Kool-Aid, and then you need to do your own research and sort of get into it to convince yourself. But I do think it's a really exciting space, and the thing that really excites me in particular is that I think we're all familiar with typical conservation and environmental initiatives, turn the lights off, recycle, drive less, insulate your home. But there are certain sticky or difficult to decarbonize sectors of the economy. And those are mobile freight transport, cement plants, glass plants, fertilizer plants. These are humongous industries that use a ton of gray hydrogen, and that really have very little options to decarbonize without hydrogen. So if we want to get to net zero by 2050, hydrogen offers the only real proven out avenue for some of these hard to decarbonize sectors of the economy. So anyway, there's my pitch for you to find out more and do a deeper dive on it. But if you do find it's something you want to support, it'd be great to call your MP and to voice your support for the Canadian hydrogen strategy, because this is something that I don't think a lot of Canadians are aware of. And it's kind of unique, like in North America, there's nothing yet from the States, although that might change soon. But most European countries have put out a fairly ambitious hydrogen strategy, partly as part of the COVID build back. And Canada was a little bit behind that wave, but they still are on the forefront in releasing this sort of fairly early. So to voice support for that strategy and then to push a little bit for specific targets, it would just be a timely time to do that. And then, the work that Bruce County has done, writing a letter of support for that project, the Bruce Innovates project, because it is kind of a unique bit of forward-thinking policy work and sort of out-of-the-box economic development, which really seeks to, solve environmental problems, but bring jobs to the area and, better our community. So it's encouraging to see a sort of lower-level government being ambitious in that way. Yeah, and then I know a lot of you are already doing this sort of in your own lifestyles, but just supporting companies that are actively trying to reduce their carbon footprint and investing in green hydrogen, and really taking a leadership role in moving the country forward, because it will take some activists. You can't always wait for the government, and it's great to see some large companies just getting ahead on it, and small. So yeah, that's my my whirlwind tour of hydrogen and what I've been up to. And I'll now take your questions.
I have a couple of questions, Luke, if that's okay.
Yeah.
First of all, were you aware of the federal government's $100 million grant today for lithium batteries to be produced in Quebec? Because,
no, it wasn't.
Yeah, and that really bothered me, because this is going to be going into, I believe, buses and trucks. But then, and I thought, oh, well, that's great. And then when I started reading about about the hydrogen, I thought, wow, because the range is much greater with hydrogen, And last month, Tenneco was bought up with the prospect of also putting in a hydrogen plant. Do you know anything about that?
I'll just do the lithium thing first. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that announcement. In general, I think as far as electric or hydrogen mobility is concerned, there's going to be a mix, and it's likely going to be a mix of the smaller vehicles, trucks, and passenger cars being electric, because there's really no better scenario than to just be able to pull into your garage, plug your electric car in, and never have to go to the gas station again. Where hydrogen cars and vehicles will likely dominate in the future is where you need like heavy payloads and constant uptime. So for delivery services, places that can't afford to have a vehicle down for 4 hours to charge, or just people who need longer range, hydrogen is likely to take a bit more of that share. But either one of them, like, they're not at war with each other. It's just there's going to be a good use case for each one in certain sectors, and it'll generally fall into the smaller vehicles being more electric. And then when you get into larger freight, trains, marine, it is likely to be hydrogen, because you need so much energy, and batteries just become incredibly heavy when you as you stack them up, basically. Whereas hydrogen is fairly light for the amount of hydrogen, or for the amount of energy that it packs, that it's better suited to those heavier vehicles. So yeah, I don't want anyone to get the impression that there's a battle coming and that I'm like down on electric vehicles now. And actually, a hydrogen car is basically just an electric vehicle, but instead of just a battery, it has a hydrogen tank and a fuel cell. So the better the electric cars become, and the more developed and the cheaper they're made, that's just going to make hydrogen cars more affordable, because the only thing that has to be done is to put a smaller battery with a hydrogen tank and a fuel cell, and then you've got a hydrogen car. And then the announcement at Tenneco, it's quite interesting, because Andrew Stewart is sort of electrolyzer royalty. He was the son of Andrew Stewart Sr., who ran Electrolyzer Canada, which was a prominent electrolyzer company sort of from the 50s to the 90s. And then they became Hydrogenics, which recently was purchased by Cummins Diesel. And so they're now kind of American, but they're based in Mississauga still. And that's the other Canadian electrolyzer company, basically, is Hydrogenics. So I think Andrew Stewart knows what he's doing, and there's not a lot to go on from the announcement that came out, except that he has an incredible partner in ABB, which is a huge Swiss power systems company. So I'm hopeful that something like really cool comes out of that, and that they're building electrolyzers in Owen Sound.
We've had a couple of questions go into the chat, and the first one is from Jiri. I think I'm pronouncing that right, I hope. And what do you think is the potential for powering homes using this?
I think it's going to be a little bit further down the line, because there's sort of an order of low-hanging fruit to be plucked before we get to powering homes. And those lower hanging fruit are sort of big fixed industries where you don't need to build a lot of infrastructure to deliver hydrogen to a lot of different places. So first, it's going to be, heavy transport and big fertilizer plants and cement plants and places that just make a ton of carbon that can be replaced with green hydrogen quickly and in one location. But then looking forward, and one place that's already doing this quite effectively is Japan, because they're kind of an energy, they don't have many natural resources, and they do import hydrogen and natural gas as one of their main energy sources. And the thing about a fuel cell is that when it converts hydrogen to electricity, it also gives off quite a bit of heat. So it's becoming increasingly common to have a fuel cell as your heating source in the house and to feed into your electrical load. And it's not sci-fi. It's like quite a common application in Japan now. The other thing that can be done early on is, and that they're doing in the UK quite effectively, is to mandate that boilers and gas gas burning devices have to be manufactured with conversion kits or to be hydrogen ready, basically. So that say a pipeline goes in 10 years, or hydrogen is brought to a town in 10 years, that the appliances that people are buying now aren't totally obsolete. So it's definitely, you know, if we want to actually get to net zero, hydrogen could be very useful as a home heating fuel, and we probably have to use it as a home heating fuel. The thing is, we could also really effectively use electricity, and we have a lot of green electricity here. So it'll be one of those things where we got to compare different investments and see if we should just electrify everybody's heating system, or if we should, you know, run pipelines, because if you run pipelines, you can run stoves and furnaces and, well, sort of more typical gas burning appliances, whereas electricity can't always run that same range of appliances. So yeah, there'll be different considerations, and it'll probably be further on in the transformation, but it is a intriguing option.
Okay. Question from Peter. Some questions about fuel cells. Do you want to do that directly, Peter, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, let me do it directly. Okay, just some questions then. I'm wondering basically how fuel cells are made, whether they need rare elements, whether they can be made on a massive scale without too much trouble, and how long do they last, and how efficient are they? Can you tell me any of those things?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know as much on the fuel cell side as I do on the electrolyzer side, but what I can tell you is that most of the affordability or manufacturing problems are quite easily solved. It's just a matter of scaling up and getting to the level of production that, you know, car companies meet every day. We actually, in Canada, we have Ballard Power Systems, which is the leader in fuel cells. But up until recently, it's really been kind of a niche, like they would sort of custom produce fuel cells, or they had like a fixed kit, but they would sort of, for every project, specifically engineer a fuel cell. Whereas what Toyota is doing with their Mirai car, or Honda with their Clarity car, is that they're sort of getting to the point of mass producing fuel cells. They're not complicated devices. They're basically like similar to a battery, where there's a whole bunch of plates and the gases come into both sides and they sort of look at each other and recombine. They're not really complicated devices. They do use a little bit of platinum, which is quite expensive, but it's still only something like 3 or 4% of their overall cost. And their overall cost is much more available for reduction through mass production and standardization. That platinum cost may never go down, it may go up, but it's still a pretty small portion of the overall cost. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then on efficiency, this is another kind of thing that is thrown around, is that fuel cells aren't very efficient. And it's true that when you're just converting hydrogen to electricity, you lose some heat, and the conversion is about 70% efficient. And that's on top of the making of the hydrogen in the first place, which is only about 80% efficient. So by the time you get your electricity back in your car, or whatever your fuel cell is powering, you've only got half the energy that was originally input into making it. But what's kind of lost in this discussion is that you got to think about where that energy is coming from. So we want to make green hydrogen. And the thing about wind and solar is that it just, the sun shines and the wind blows when it wants to, and it doesn't always overlap with when people need electricity. Especially wind power is usually the highest output at night, when we're trying to, like, everyone's going to sleep and there's really not a lot of demand for it. But what hydrogen allows you to do is still run your turbines, still make gas, use all that equipment to its fullest potential, and then capture that energy. So even if your total chain of efficiency isn't as attractive as a battery, you're just using electricity that you would have no use for anyway. So that's one, like, there's definitely efficiency losses, but they have to be held in context of where the energy is coming from and how making gas allows you to use your renewable infrastructure to a way bigger capacity than you'd be able otherwise if you were just producing electricity to be used as electricity.
So thinking about what we can do locally, and so we are in touch on a very small scale with in Gray and Bruce with some of the municipalities. And you mentioned the initiative of on a county level. I don't know if you have any thoughts about what municipalities can actually do, either or what you have seen or maybe heard in this space, because there's only so much, you know, what's the leverage that we can apply as a group?
Yeah, so you're right that especially small municipalities are a little bit limited, and their main tool is the power of their fleet. And one of the challenges for hydrogen is the chicken and egg problem. Like, oh, there's no hydrogen. How would I ever have a hydrogen vehicle? And then, you know, oh, I have a hydrogen vehicle, but nowhere to buy the hydrogen. So a way that a municipality can help is to commit to being an off-taker for a hydrogen production facility. And a hydrogen production facility needs to have a certain number of off-takers because they can't build like unlimited storage or, you know, ship hydrogen too far without it getting cost, you know, prohibitive. So like in the future, if this demonstration plant comes to fruition, local municipalities could commit to being a hydrogen off-taker for that facility. And maybe they accept one tanker truck of hydrogen to their filling station at their central municipal yard. And they've got whatever the number is, 5 trucks that run on it, or 5 just like county vehicles that people drive around in that run on it. And if the local counties can get enough vehicles, we look, some of the project development that my boss and others do, it's usually about 20 like town buses that need to be taking hydrogen off to sort of justify a small electrolyzer plant. So it's some combination of pickup trucks and cars and buses or fleet vehicles that are saying we will receive that much hydrogen every week or whatever. That helps to get past that chicken and egg problem and really like builds visibility, right? Like you put a nice H2 or whatever on those cars and you show your support for this green initiative. And yeah, that's a big way. And I guess just in their power of advocacy to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which they seem to have eyes on electric buses and electric charging stations, but hydrogen infrastructure is sort of not really on the radar, I would say, for a lot of advocacy groups.
What is the ratio in terms of the amount of energy it takes to break the O's from the H's, and how much, what's the return in terms, it costs kind of energy to break them, and it provides energy by fusing them again?
Depends on like how efficient the electrolyzer and the fuel cell is, but you're looking at about 50 to 65% efficiency. So you're losing 35% of the input energy in heat, either during the electrolysis or during the fuel cell. So that's where like we totally cede the low ground to, or the high ground, whatever it is, to small battery operated cars, because they have efficiency of like 80%, right? So we're not as good there. But if there's a use case where you can't use a battery, or there's a case where you can't make fertilizer without making ammonia out of natural gas, which is hugely carbon intensive, then making hydrogen even at 50% efficiency is still attractive because it's your only decarbonization route.
Will you be competitive with Enbridge plans for blue hydrogen with gas coming from Alberta?
No. And blue hydrogen is a bit of a slippery one because like oil companies really like blue hydrogen because it allows them to do what they've been doing already and just slap a carbon capture plant on the back of their existing dirty hydrogen production plant, and they're making blue hydrogen and they're back in business, so to speak. I don't want to be too down on blue hydrogen either, because the sort of public acceptance of hydrogen and some of these chicken and egg problems may need some blue hydrogen supply to help them get some momentum and get going. And the same thing goes with just politically, you know, a lot of oil workers could be put back to work by making blue hydrogen. And Alberta could get behind climate change action by making blue hydrogen. The risk is that we get stuck on blue hydrogen and never get to green, which is kind of what happened with natural gas. Like we got off of oil for home heating and went to natural gas because it was greener, but it's still hugely carbon intensive. And now we've all converted over to it, and we're kind of stuck on it. So you just want to be careful with blue hydrogen and really advocate for green, but it's going to be a mix, at least in this first transition period. And it may even be helpful, at least at the beginning, just like to get boilers made that are ready for hydrogen, to get cars, and then we can always make it green at any time. I don't know, it's a bit of a slippery one because you don't want to give up too much. And then the thing about blue is that there's only really one large carbon capture facility in Canada, and that's the Quest facility in Alberta. And they've only able to capture 65% of the carbon that's generated, and or that's coming into them. They only are able to sequester 65%, and it's been a huge cost overrun nightmare. And there's even questions as to whether once you capture the carbon, what do you do with it? Like, do you pump that underground? Do you put it into products? It's also in its infancy. So oil companies like to say, you know, we're doing blue hydrogen and we've got the problem solved, but you have to be very careful. Or if there's another project coming out that says they're going to make blue hydrogen, there has to be tough questions asked, like what's going to happen with the carbon, and how do you know it'll be stuck for perpetuity and not just leak out?
So Luke, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. I think people
Okay.
really enjoyed hearing from you. Yes, good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll love to talk about this stuff. So,
I'm going to actually, Luke, I will ask the group whether they would like us to draft those 2 letters on behalf of Georgian Bluffs CAT.
that would be great.
To send to Bruce Innovate as well as the federal government.
Thank you very much.